Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Moving Beyond Earth exhibition. We have a really exciting program this afternoon. I think you will be thrilled to hear what people have to say and to discuss with them the issues associated with what has come down to us as the overview effect. And for those of you who've not heard of that before, it is the perspective that one gains when they look from orbit down to Earth and what that means. It has a profound influence philosophically and every other way that you can imagine with those who have been able to experience this particular activity in Earth orbit. And that, of course, has been astronauts and cosmonauts and taikonauts up to this point, and maybe a few tourists. But more in the future we'll be able to experience this, at least we hope so. I am Roger Wanius. I am Associate Director here at the Museum for Collections and Curatorial Affairs, and it is my pleasure to have you here this afternoon. We're going to begin with a little video that talks about the overview effect, and at the end of that I'm going to invite 4 speakers up to the platform to talk more about it. 2 of them have experienced it firsthand. Sandy Magnus, who is a former astronaut, and Michael Lopez Alegria, who's also a former astronaut. Beyond that, Frank White, who is the author of a book called The Overview Effect, and David Beaver, who's a co-founder of the Overview Institute. So with that, I would like to ask you to take your seats. Please look to the monitors, and we will show this video for about 19 minutes.
In 1968, Apollo 8 went to the moon. They didn't land, but they did circle the moon. And I was watching it on television, and at a certain point, one of the astronauts casually said, "We're going to turn the camera around and show you the Earth." And he did. And that was the first time I had ever seen the planet hanging in space like that. And it was profound.
I think that for me, like for many other people, it was quite a shock. I don't think any of us had any expectations about how it would give us such a different perspective. I think the focus had been, we're going to the stars, we're going to the other planets, and suddenly we look back at ourselves and it seems to imply a new kind of self-awareness.
One of the astronauts said, when we originally went to the moon, our total focus was on the moon. We weren't thinking about looking back at the Earth. But now that we've done it, that may well have been the most important reason we went.
Oh, golly, I remember going through launch, which is an overwhelming experience. The engines cut off. I felt myself floating out of the seat. I floated over to the window, looked out, and we were coming up over the coast of Africa. And that's when it hit me. I'm in space. And, you know, I just got incredibly excited because it's something I had dreamed about since I was 6 years old.
I think you start out with this idea of what it's going to be like. And then when you do finally look at the Earth for the first time, you're overwhelmed by how much more beautiful it really is when you see it for real. It's just like it's this dynamic, alive place that you see glowing all the time.
It was truly incredible to be up there doing what I always wanted to do my whole life, and then to kind of glance back at our planet and see that view was just tremendous.
I can only describe what I've seen. You know, looking down at the Earth and you see that line that separates day into night slowly moving across the planet. Thunderstorms on the horizon casting these long shadows as the sun sets. And then watching the Earth come alive. And you see the lights from the cities and the towns.
The events you see from space, like flying over thunderstorms, looking at them from the top, were spectacular. Like a fireworks show going on, and you're looking at it from the very top.
You know, shooting stars going below us, or you know, dancing curtains of auroras. It's just very hard to describe all the, you know, the colors, the beauty, the motion.
My job as lunar module pilot was to be responsible for the lunar module itself and responsible for the science on the moon. So when we started home, I had a little more time to look out the window than the other guys because most of my responsibilities were completed. We were in a particular mode called the barbecue mode. So we were flying like this and rotating like that. What that caused to happen was every 2 minutes, a picture of the Earth, the moon, the sun, and a 360-degree panorama of the heavens appeared in the spacecraft window. And I had studied astronomy, and I had studied cosmology, and fully understood that the molecules in my body, and the molecules in my partner's bodies, and in the spacecraft, had been prototyped in some ancient generation of stars. In other words, it was pretty obvious from those descriptions, we're stardust. Well, that was pretty awesome and powerful, particularly since I had a little more time at this point to be reflective and to think about it.
Awe, I think, is one of those words that you have a better understanding of once you see it, too. I felt like, you know, using the word awesome was totally appropriate when it came to describing what the planet looks like.
To have that experience of awe is, at least for the moment, to let go of yourself, to transcend the sense of separation. So it's not just that they were experiencing something other than them, but that they were at some very deep level integrating, realizing their interconnectedness with that beautiful blue-green ball.
And this is why the astronauts, particularly in the International Space Station, often say that much of their free time is filled with what they call Earth gazing, just staring out at the Earth. They can stare for hours because the changing scenery, the interactivity of the biosphere, all of this has an incredible aesthetic impact.
The beauty of seeing Earth as a planet, as opposed to being down here among it, is a wonderful experience to then start to get into what we call the big picture effect or the overview effect.
I was flying cross country from the East Coast to the West Coast in the 1970s. And I was looking out the window, and as I was looking down at the planet, the thought came to me, anyone living in a space settlement or living on the moon would always have an overview. They would see things that we know, but we don't experience, which is that the Earth is one system, we're all part of that system, and that there is a certain unity and a coherence to it all. And I immediately called it the overview effect.
You do, from that perspective, see the Earth as a planet. You see the sun as a star. We see the sun in the blue sky, but up there, you see the sun in a black sky. So yeah, you are seeing it from a cosmic perspective.
We've been evolving from the beginning of civilization to a larger and larger perspective of life on the Earth. But the next natural evolution is understanding the life in space. That is, the fact that the Earth, as Buckminster Fuller used to famously say, is a spaceship, Spaceship Earth. We are in space already. It's just that we haven't brought that into our perspective as we live here on Earth. The overview effect is simply the sudden recognition that we live on a planet and all the implications that it brings to life on Earth.
When we look down at the Earth from space, we see this amazing, indescribably beautiful planet. It looks like a living, breathing organism, but it also, at the same time, looks extremely fragile.
Because you go outside on a clear day and it's the big blue sky, and it's like it goes on forever, right? And how could we possibly, put enough stuff into it to fill it up with things that really change it? And yet, you see it from space, and it's this thin line which is just barely hugging the surface of the planet.
Anybody else who's ever gone to space says the same thing, because it really is striking and it's really sobering to see this paper-thin layer and to realize that that little paper-thin layer is all that protects every living thing on Earth from death, basically, from the harshness of space.
There's this very poetic concept that a lot of people express, that there are no boundaries from space. And I've heard a lot of my astronaut colleagues say that. Unfortunately, it's not true. You do see boundaries. They're mostly the result of human impact. You can see erosion, clear-cutting of forests, and it's a long litany of environmental impact that we've had on our planet. And that's something which, when you see it from a cosmic perspective, makes you really appreciate the concept of Spaceship Earth, and that we're all here together.
After I came back and tried to understand what this experience was all about, I could find nothing in the science literature about it, and nothing in the religious literature that I looked at. So I turned to the local university and asked them to help me with what I saw. And when they came back to me a few weeks later and said, well, in the ancient literature, we found a description called Salvakapa Samadhi. And they said that means that you see things as you see them with your eyes, but you experience them emotionally and viscerally as with ecstasy and a sense of total unity and oneness. And I said, well, that's exactly what the experience was. And so it's rather clear to me as I study this, it wasn't anything new, but was something that was very important to the way we humans were put together.
Many of the great wisdom traditions of the Earth have pointed to what we're calling the overview effect. That is to say, they have realized this unity, this oneness of all life on Earth and of consciousness and awareness.
Within the Western tradition, I think it's quite new and quite shocking, because there's been much more of a sense of separation. But if you look at other non-Western cultures, especially in Asia, the emphasis on those has always been on realization that the self and the world are not separate from each other, but that they're really interconnected, that the individual self and the species as a whole is a manifestation of the larger whole.
As you go into your mind in a contemplative way, the sense of the living reality of the planet becomes obvious. You become more in tune with the natural world. This is very akin to the direct perception that the astronauts have. So it's no wonder that many people have likened the overview effect to a spiritual or meditative experience, although it's not exactly that. It's a cognitive shift that very often can produce a kind of meditative experience.
I'm sure we all interpret it somewhat differently. I know some of the fellows go right to a religious explanation. I didn't. I went to more science explanation. And I think all that's wonderful. That's what it takes to build a civilization.
This view of the Earth from space, the whole Earth perspective, I think is the true symbol of this age. And I believe that what's going to happen is there's going to be a greater and greater interest in communicating this idea, because after all, it's key to our survival. We have to start acting as one species with one destiny. We are not going to survive if we don't do that.
We're seeing very clearly that if the Earth becomes sick, then we become sick. If the Earth dies, then we're going to die. People sense that something's wrong, but they're still struggling to go back and find out what the real roots of the problem are. And I think what we need to come to is the realization that it's not just fixing an economic or political system, but it's a basic worldview, a basic understanding of who we are that's at stake.
And a part of that is to come up with a new story, a new picture, a new way to approach this, and to shift our behaviors in such a way that it leads to a sustainable approach to our civilization as opposed to a destructive approach.
It is a fragile planet, and if we don't take care of it and we don't work together, then we are going to have bigger issues than we have now down the road.
On a grand scale, that's, we're basically all living in this one ecosystem called Earth. And everything that you do on one side of the ecosystem affects the other side. And that is a new way for living for most of humanity.
We humans are responsible for ourselves, and if we are endangering our future, then we've got to learn how to do it differently and to go forward into a sustainable period. And right now, that seems very difficult to see how it's going to be, but we've got to work on it.
When I was above the space station, looking down at the space station, and looking down at the, against the Earth, and seeing this, amazing accomplishment, I was thinking, wow, there was 15 nations that worked together to build this amazing orbital complex in space. And if we can, take these 15 nations and do this amazing accomplishment, imagine what we can do by working together, by setting aside our differences for a common goal to overcome some of the challenges facing our planet.
We have this connection to Earth. I mean, it's our home. And I don't know how you can come back and not, in some way be changed. It may be subtle. You see differences in, different people in the just general response when they come back from space. But I think collectively, everybody has that emblazoned on their memories, the way the planet looks. You can't take that lightly. It really, you realize that you've been blessed by the opportunity to see that.
It really does look like this beautiful oasis out in the middle of nothingness. And if you have a chance for your eyes to adjust and you can actually see the stars in the Milky Way, it's this oasis against the backdrop of infinity, of this just, enormous universe behind it. And it's, really a very moving experience to be able to see that with your eyes.
You look back at it, and it's placed perfectly from the sun to take care of us, and you kind of take that reverse role on about, okay, well, we need to be taking care of it too, so that it can continue to do that for us. And I don't know how you can't have a greater appreciation for it after you see it that way.
Each of our speakers up. Please give them a round of applause. And what I'm going to do basically for the rest of the time is to recede into the background, I hope, and allow them to make comments, and then we will entertain questions at the end. And there's a microphone over here that I will invite you to come up to. Those who are standing in the back, if you would like to sit down, there are seats over here and over in this area as well. If I could turn the program over to Sandy to say a few words.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Oh, you want to come over here? That's great. Yeah, by all means.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation to come and speak. It's always fun to share space experiences because they're actually very special. And I'll repeat a little bit of what you heard in the movie, because you do, once you had a chance to spend some time in space, you do get a different view of the planet. And it's interesting because it's a view that it's based on your own experience. And there's a big difference between knowledge that you gain just from intellectually learning it versus knowledge that you gain from experience. For example, when you turn the oven on, or you turn the stove on, you know it's hot, you know, that's the whole purpose of turning it on. But when you actually put your hand in the oven, or you touch the fire or the electric burner, you feel that heat and you understand hot in a different way. Or if you hear the temperature outside is 20 degrees Fahrenheit with a wind chill of -16, you know that's really cold. You know that intellectually. But when you go outside and the wind rips through 5 layers of clothing and you feel it, you know it's cold in a completely different way. And that's exactly what happens to us when we go to space and we spend some time there, like Mike and I have been able to do on the space station. You look out the window, and just like Ron said and Nicole emphasized in the movie, you look out the window and you see how thin the atmosphere is, and you know that in a completely different way. Because it is very startling. I remember the first words out of my mouth when I opened the Palo Bay doors on my first flight was, "Oh my goodness, look how thin our atmosphere is." It's incredible how it hits you, that experience of seeing the atmosphere as this, no kidding, paper thin layer of air that protects us and keeps us safe. And your view of the planet and your experience of the planet changes at that point, because you see it as, no kidding, a spaceship. You see it as one integrated system. We can sit here in this room and we know that China is half a world away and there's a big ocean in between and there's probably trees and mountains and rocks and people living over there. And you know that, but when you see the planet from the way that Mike and I did and our colleagues, it gives you a completely different impression of the connection between us here and everybody else all over the world and all of the rest of the planet. So it really does change your view. And I'll add another little story to this that was a very interesting perspective change that I had from flying in space. And it was one I was not expecting. And when we get ready to fly in space, we're always a little bit concerned about how we're going to adapt to space and what's it going to be like and how's it going to affect us and things like this. But we never really think about what it's like to come back to our planet and how that journey is going to affect us as well. And one of the most surprising things to me when I was returning to Earth, even after my first mission, which was 10 days long, was gravity. And what gravity was. My perspective on gravity, Mike's perspective on gravity, is totally different than your perspective on gravity, because I have experienced gravity in a way that you have not. I have been out of gravity. I've been able to float around in the shuttle and in the space station. Oh, by the way, that's very fun. It's really, really great. You adapt to it. It's amazing what we adapt to as human beings. It was very normal to float around and push off from this wall and float to that wall and hang from the ceiling or hang from the wall or whatever. It was very normal. I didn't even think about it. As we were re-entering the atmosphere, and I started to feel gravity acting on my body, I felt this horrible, monstrous, oppressive force pushing me down into my seat, making me activate my arm muscles to hold my procedures. They felt heavy. I felt heavy. And I remember thinking as I was coming in that first time, oh my goodness, I can't believe we get anything done on this planet. It's just amazing. And so that perspective change really started me thinking about, well, what is gravity anyway, and where does it come from, and why does it exist, and how did we evolve to work in this horrible, monstrous force field? And so I got a completely different view on gravity. And by the way, we can explain gravity. We can explain gravity, but we can't, we can describe it, but we can't explain it. We don't really understand why two masses attract each other. So it's kind of interesting. This fundamental force that shapes who we are, we don't really understand. And so that was a very interesting perspective change as well. So I would add that to the overview effect is even a little bit of a perspective change about how we live our lives here on the ground and how the environment that we're in shapes us and how we've adapted to it so incredibly well. And just going back to space every time, it was amazing what a sense of freedom I had with being able to float around the way we did. And the movie was exactly right on target when the descriptions were given about how we spend time at the window, when we look out at the planet, and how beautiful it is, and how fragile it is, and how much you really appreciate it. You know, the perspectives that I've gained from my career as an astronaut really lead me to the conclusion that you should not take things for granted. You know, I was on the space station for 4.5 months, and I don't know, Mike, if you noticed, but I was missing going outside. After being there for about 4 months, I was ready to actually go outside. I missed being able to walk outside, feel the breeze on my face, feel the sun on my face, listen to the breeze blow through some trees, hear the water in the river or the creek go by. Just being outside was something that I missed, so don't take that for granted. And I remember we landed, I was on the middeck after I came home, after my 4.5 month stay, and they opened the hatch, and a breeze, you know, a nice moist sea breeze came through the hatch, and I said, the guys on the flight, the middeck, when they said, "Guys, that's a fresh breeze, that's really spectacular," and they all looked at me like I was crazy. But, you know, they had only been up there for 10 or 12 days, and I had been in a tin can with artificial air, circling around the planet for 4.5 months, and so you learn not to take things for granted. So there's several different perspectives that you gain from actually exiting out of our system and then looking down on it. And it's a very valuable perspective, and it's very exciting that more and more people are going to have opportunities to do that. So I will wrap up here, and if you have questions for me later, I'd be happy to answer any of them.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Frank White now to make a few comments. Do you want to do it from there or come up here? Come up. Okay.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today. I just want to start by thanking Roger and the National Air and Space Museum for hosting this discussion of the overview effect. It's a major moment for those of us who've been spending our lives studying this phenomenon. And I want to thank Paul Griffith, who has been tirelessly working behind the scenes to make this happen today. This is a very special place for me. I see a lot of kids in the audience. When I was your age, I used to come to the Smithsonian Institution. There was no National Air and Space Museum, but it was a magical place for me where I thought, there are a lot of possibilities in this world. Humanity's been doing a lot of things in history, and we can do a lot of things in the future. The last time I was here, it repeated a motif in my life, which is substituting for other speakers. This is something that's happened to me over and over again. I won't bore you with all the times it's happened. But in this particular case, I had a call from John Logsdon. Some of you may know he's one of the great space policy experts of all time. And he said, "Frank, I have an invitation that I hope is not an insult." I said, "Well, what is it?" "Well, in 2 days, we're going to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Apollo 11 landing. We're going to have a panel like this. And we had Gene Roddenberry coming. Those of you who don't know, Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek. Great creative force in the space field. Well, Gene can't come, and he was supposed to talk about the next 1,000 years of space exploration. So we're sitting around saying, who can do that? And immediately it occurred to me, Frank White can do it. I said, well, that's not an insult, that's a compliment. I'd be happy to come. So I did come. That was 1989. A lot of things have changed. We were going to Mars, the moon, and beyond back in those days. And there were a lot of plans that haven't come to fruition, but a lot that have. And I'm not a substitute today, am I?
No,
I'm not substituting for anybody. Good. So what is this overview effect that we're talking about? Well, there are many levels to it. David and I have formed the Overview Institute to try to unravel this message, this phenomenon. I like to call it a message from the universe to us, human beings, about who we are, where we are, and where we're going. And it's a complex message. But since I've been working on it, you noticed in the film I had an insight flying cross country that helped me coin the term overview effect. And I started interviewing astronauts. And what I found is astronauts have been trying to communicate to us for 50 years what it is. And it's not that they aren't articulate. You just heard Sandy, very articulate. It's the fact that we don't have a shared context. As she said, there's a difference between experience and intellectual knowledge. We know we're on a planet. We don't experience that we're on a planet. We know it's rushing through the universe at a high rate of speed. It's a stable platform to us. So this bringing the overview effect down to earth is bringing these experiences back to those of us who haven't had the experience yet. And that is really going to be the key, I think, ultimately. How do we translate this experience into our knowledge, those of us who haven't flown yet? That film is very important because it's very experiential. This is the book, The Overview Effect, which I wrote in 1987. Probably, maybe 50,000 people have read this book or heard of it. Believe me, it's not a bestseller. If it were, I might be somewhere else today. It's been a critical success and a commercial, not quite failure. But in any event, almost 4 million people have seen this film. And they've absorbed this message because it's experiential, it's easy to absorb, it's easy to grasp. The overview effect has many important aspects. I'm going to try to work in 3. 1, it combines unity and diversity in a beautiful way. As Sandy and all the astronauts talked about, you know, when we're on the surface, this place looks pretty chaotic. And sometimes we think it has no purpose and it has no plan. There's nothing holding it all together. Then suddenly you're seeing the same thing from orbit, and it looks beautiful. It's awe-inspiring. It has purpose, some astronauts say. And it brings many of the astronauts to want to do something about it. They want to bring that experience down to Earth. Ron Garan founded Fragile Oasis because he wants to solve the problems of Earth because of what he saw from space. Other astronauts say, I want to take more people out there. And I've had many astronauts say to me, we need to have a summit conference in orbit because political leaders would not act the way they do if they'd had the experience that I had. So it brings this unity and diversity together nicely. As David says in the film, as many astronauts have said, as Sandy has said, hey, you want to live in space? We're already living in space. We just don't know it yet. We are on a natural spaceship. If the Earth is a spaceship, as Bucky Fuller said, we're the crew. You and you and you, we're all the crew. Are we acting like a crew? No. If Sandy and Mike behaved the way human beings do on Earth, the International Space Station would be no more. So we need to start coming together as a species. We need to start working on solving problems of environmental degradation, war and peace, hunger, poverty, and disease. We need to get our act together. And that's the last point I want to make. There's the overview and there's the effect. There's the experience and then there's the effect it has. And our astronauts are really heroic, not only in going there, but in coming back and sharing and trying to have an effect on us. We've already seen some of the effects in the environmental movement, which has become very, very powerful since Apollo. Commercial space development, which Mike's going to talk about, if Virgin Galactic achieves what it's hoping to achieve, which is to fly the 600 people who've signed up for their suborbital hops, they will fly more people in a few years than all the governments on the planet have flown in 50 years. The score will be 600 to 534. That means many more people like you and me will be having the overview, and then we'll have an opportunity to come back and have an effect. And that's one of the reasons I've come up with this phrase I call the right to flight. I think if the overview effect is as important as we say, everybody should have the experience, either through a high-quality simulation or through going. And I suggested it would be great to have overview scholarships where we selected people to fly, not because they had the money, but because they might come back and do something really quite extraordinary with that experience. That is not an Overview Institute program, but it is typical of our intent and what we're trying to do. So I would just close and say that I believe that the more people who have this experience take it seriously and come back and do something with it, we'll start to find our true purpose, and we'll not only be citizens of the earth, but we'll move toward becoming citizens of the universe. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to ask David Beaver to come forward, talk a little bit about the cognitive issues associated with this.
Abraham Lincoln supposedly wrote to someone that he didn't have time enough to write a short letter to them, so he wrote a long one. The difficulty here is compiling an enormous amount of information about this extraordinary experience and distilling it down into just a few minutes. I'm going to do my best. You may hear me speaking rapidly. Let's see if we can't get through some of these points so that perhaps you get a better understanding of what this effect is and why it might be interesting enough for you all to learn more about it, to communicate it to others. Because since before recorded history, mankind has been fascinated with the sky and the stars and has dreamed of travel to the celestial bodies since the beginning of civilization. Today, the dream is more alive than ever because we've been there and seen our Earth from the outside, and that creates a peculiar shift in the mind. I'm going to talk about that. This is the experience that Frank has termed the overview effect. Frank interviewed dozens of astronauts and found that nearly all of them experienced some sort of shifted or intensified perspective and perception concerning various aspects, not just of space, but of life on the Earth, just from seeing the planet with their own eyes. Dr. Charles Berry, the astronaut's longtime personal physician and surgeon, said no one who went into space wasn't changed by the experience. I think some of them don't yet understand what happened to them. For half a century, astronauts and cosmonauts have reported remarkable reactions to the sensory experience of seeing the Earth as a planet turning in an infinite universe of stars. While it's easy to see that such an experience is both beautiful and awe-inspiring, most astronauts report shifts and changes in their understanding and perspectives concerning many aspects of life on Earth, changes that are often lifelong. Comparing the many different accounts, Frank found numerous commonalities expressed in individual ways. The book was perhaps the first to identify and catalog the various aspects of this shifted perspective and to consider the many ways that these shifts have and will influence our world, especially as they become more commonly known and experienced. We've talked about already the coming field of commercial spaceflight. A few of these experiences are nearly universal. The incredible paper thinness of the atmosphere, the interactivity of the biosphere, the smallness of the planet when seen in the vastness of the universe, and even the fact, seemingly already known, that many of the astronauts have commented on peculiarly, is that the Earth is round. All of these are aspects of the fact that we live on a planet, something that we know intellectually. As Sandy was talking about the difference between the intellectual knowledge that we live on a planet and the implications of that fact and how it would influence our decisions in daily life. There are also a number of common emotions and feelings. Chief among them was the sense of the fragility of the planet and the felt need to protect it. This was one of the primary reasons for the forming of the Association of Space Explorers, the astronauts' own organization, as well as this related sense that they talked about of returning, feeling for the first time a citizen of the planet rather than the locality of their origin. So as Frank mentioned, they frequently felt a strong sense of kinship or commonality with the peoples of the Earth, using phrases like "we're all in this together." And there are hundreds of such statements from other astronauts, which we've been working to compile. and to publicize. Frank also documented many of their predictions that these effects would create huge social changes once this understanding and this perspective and the experience itself began to percolate through our culture. And we certainly today have remarkable new technologies for doing that, both the internet and modern media systems and increasingly sophisticated simulation and virtual reality systems, which are needed in order to get this across. Let me quickly list some of the most important ideas that I want to leave you with. First, from hundreds of astronaut statements, we know that the overview effect is a very real, interesting, unusual, and potentially profoundly moving experience. As Frank and I have said numerous times, neither he nor the Institute invented the experience. We're simply researching and extending the reports of the astronauts themselves. Frank coined the term, and that's given focus to it so that we can study it as a subject. Secondly, this is not just an experience of the legendary beauty of the Earth and the understandable awe and wonder of seeing the universe directly. Rather, there is a subtle shift in the very makeup of the mind of the astronaut. So subtle, in fact, that it may go unnoticed for some time, overwhelmed by the very barrage of sensory experiences that produces it. Or it may have a very quick and sudden change. Both have happened. Third, there are more familiar experiences that also produce shifts and changes in a person's mental makeup. Some of these, which Frank has termed overview analogs, are multicultural travel, extensive education, strong physical experiences such as wilderness trekking, deep sea diving, ocean sailing, mountain climbing, and the like. Not to say that they produce the same thing, but they produce a sudden shift that changes a person's worldview. Many of these analogs have been studied by cognitive brain-mind scientists. This is my field. And we've applied these findings to the space experience directly until we can come to the time of making direct cognitive studies of the astronauts. Dr. Andrew Newberg, a founding member of the Overview Institute and a noted neuroscientist, has already outlined the protocols of our first study. In the fullest sense, a worldview is the picture of the world that we all have in our heads. It includes all that you know, believe, and have experienced personally. The nature, formation, influences, and change in worldviews is studied academically in political policy think tanks, graduate schools of anthropology, history, even the philosophy of science. So fourth, there's this question of why the majority of us earthbound folks don't get this perspective. Why don't we get this shift? Despite ever newer and more amazing pictures, this experience is still relatively unknown to the public. As astronaut Michael Collins, the third man on Apollo 11, said, "Those who saw the pictures of the Earth and thought, 'Oh, I've seen everything those astronauts have seen,' were kidding themselves. An image alone was a pseudosite that denied the reality of the matter." So what's the difference? Media research tells us that these pictures have far less information in them than we think. You need to experience it directly. You need to have more sophisticated simulations. We need to work to get those simulations into the public. Fifth, all of this analysis and even the evocative statements of the astronauts would be primarily of interest to space enthusiasts and academics if it were not for the fact that a new commercial space age is just beginning that will take tens of thousands of us into space. Michael's going to talk more about that in a minute. And finally, while advocates of Earth-based concerns push back on the expense and attention devoted to manned space programs, the synchronous parallels between the very cognitive shifts produced by the overview effect and the areas of current world challenges and crises are very striking. The environment, world conflicts, energy, resources, and a host of humanitarian issues are common to both the space experience and the priorities of many world change advocates. So if you talk to such folks who are working in these areas, they'll tell you that one of the most difficult challenges they have is to get people to think on a global or even planetary scale. The overview effect does this almost immediately. If we can communicate this to the world, two things are likely to occur. One is that everyone working in world change activities will have a remarkable new tool and resource to use. And secondly, we will gain a new, much more vital, much more stirring and moving understanding of the value of manned spaceflight. I urge you all to take a look at this issue, help us move this through the world, through the culture, and thank you very kindly.
And lastly, I'd like to bring up Michael Lopez Alegria. He is, of course, a former astronaut, but he is now working to make the future a reality at the Commercial Spaceflight Foundation, and he's going to talk about what I think is going to be actually a very exciting future.
Well, thank you, Roger, and thanks for the invitation and this hosting the event at this great venue. And thanks to all of you for coming to my personal therapy session. The reason that I say that is it's been pointed out that astronauts, if you look at this stage and you try to pick the person up here who looks like he could explain something, who looks like an artist, you realize it's not Sandy or me, it's David. And the fact is that Sandy and I, she's a PhD engineer, I'm a Navy test pilot. We're picked for certain skills, but one of them is not communicating these touchy-feely things to the grand public. And so it is a little bit of an invitation for us to sort of bare our souls here, because this is the kind of thing that's very important, I think, to get the message out, and it's not something that we talk about very often. So what you're seeing on the image here is my first experience of the overview effect. It was STS-73 in 1995, 16-day mission. We did 256 orbits of the Earth. And because you can imagine that if I plucked one of you out of the audience and took you into space, I think the feeling that you get looking out the window would be almost incapacitating. But for Sandy and me, we had been trained for hundreds of hours. We'd seen thousands of photos of the Earth from space to get ready to do Earth observation. We had heard from our colleagues. We were as ready as you could possibly be. And yet there is still something that's incredibly shocking about that actual first glance out the window. Jeff Hoffman described it pretty well in the film. But it is the beginning of the overview effect. And I don't know if I would call it something that is about stewardship of the planet or wanting to build more harmony between countries. But I found that I felt like I was a changed person when I came back. And then reality set in, and I still had to pay the mortgage, and I still had to wash my car. And I started thinking, to be frank, the effect sort of faded, or at least I thought it faded after time. But one thing I remember from a quote after my flight in an interview, I said, we did 256 orbits of the Earth. I think there are 193 nations in the UN, so with a few spares, I could take a world leader for one orbit, and I'll bet the world will be a better place. And I think that really, I didn't think of it at the time, but I think that really sums up this, the effect of this overview effect. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know it's positive. I know it's good, and I think that the more people that can experience it, the better it off for everybody. And so that leads me to the second part of what I want to talk about. And what you're seeing now are a couple of videos. Some are CGI and some are actually real footage of programs that are going to help all of you be able to experience the overview effect one day. So I walked away from what was arguably a pretty good job at NASA about a year and a half ago to come work with the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, because I really think this is important. I think commercial spaceflight is a key to our future human exploration of space. I think we're doing two things that are very important. One is restoring a national strategic capability, and the other one is democratizing access to space. So on the first front, restoring the capability. When Sandy landed on Atlantis in July of 2011 on STS-135, that was the last time that we flew the space shuttle, and that was the end of our ability to launch our astronauts to space, period. You could argue about why that happened, but the fact is that's where we are. And now, when we go to space, like we did last night with 3 of our colleagues, and we do 4 times a year, we launch on a Soyuz rocket out of Kazakhstan. We spend about $450 million a year paying the Russians to do that service for us. And NASA recently undertook a program to change that called the Commercial Crew Program, where they are engaging with companies to develop a spacecraft, which is a very costly, expensive thing, but in a little bit of a different way. And so rather than contracting with one builder to make it and to sort of pay them by the hour, they embarked on a different kind of contracting mechanism, which was to enter in a firm fixed price agreement, which was milestone-based. The government is not involved with the day-to-day details of what the design is going to look like, so that gives the companies what they call decision speed to make their decisions quicker. There's competition. There are 3 companies involved in this right now, and the companies have skin in the game, so they have their own investment, and the result is that the taxpayer, all of you and me, are getting a lot more bang for our buck. So there's a twofold purpose. One is to take our astronauts to the International Space Station, and the other is to build an economy in low Earth orbit, where we might have people who can go there routinely. We have flown 7 tourists to space on 8 different missions. They paid anywhere from $20 to $50 million to do that. The last one just signed up for $50 million, and there's still unsatisfied demand. But that's really not the realm for most of us in this room. Some of these things, on the other hand, might just well be. These are 3 companies that are going to a low Earth orbit or near space. So the difference between going to orbit like the space shuttle did, which is at Mach 25, and going to 100 kilometers, which is the Kármán line, 60 miles up, which is sort of the artificial definition of space, is pretty big from a technology standpoint, and that means that the price is a lot more accessible. So on the 47th anniversary of Sputnik, on October 4th, 2004, a company won something called the Ansari X Prize, where somebody flew to the edge of space twice in 2 weeks, a commercial company. And that was sort of the dawn of this new commercial space age that both Frank and David mentioned. And now the successor of that idea is Virgin Galactic, who in this next video you'll see is actually doing test flights on their vehicle that will be dropped from a mothership, light a rocket engine, and go to 100 kilometers altitude, giving the people in the back, 6 participants, first of all, a heck of a ride on the way up, and then about 3 to 5 minutes of zero-G on the way down, and coming down to a glided landing. So, and the one in the middle you might have seen was a company just announced itself about a month ago called Worldview, which is actually a balloon. So rather than a ball of fire, they use a ball of helium gas to get up to about 30 kilometers. If you saw Felix Baumgartner jump out of the perfectly good balloon at 30 kilometers, you get a sense of what the Earth looks like from that altitude. So I think the overview effect will be in play there. And this is an interesting thing. Of the 438 people who have been, the 536 people who have been to space, only a couple of them have only done suborbital flights. So the guy who flew on Spaceship One, and then one of the X-15 pilots. Everybody else has orbited the Earth. So it'll be interesting to see what the overview effect is when it's such a short exposure. My sense is that the fact that the folks that will be doing it will not be as experienced training-wise will make that at least as impactful. And I can only think that that positive effect that we're all struggling a little bit here to describe will make the world a better place. So thanks for that.
Thank you. We'd like to now open the floor up for questions from anybody in the audience, but before I do that, I would like to just point out that hanging in our Milestones of Flight gallery outside is Spaceship One, the vehicle that took the Ansari X Prize in 2004, and I would urge you all to see it at some point before you leave the building. And additionally, directly behind you all, right back here, reclining in a case, is the spacesuit of Dennis Tito, the first space tourist. So if there are questions from anyone, I would invite you up to the microphone. Please feel free to come up and ask about the overview effect or any other questions that you might have.
Hi, I'm Darshan Karawat. I'm originally from Mumbai, India, and I'm an aerospace engineer that works at the Environmental Protection Agency. And I guess I sort of had a question for you about, since a lot of decisions need to be made fairly quickly over the next 10 or 20 years regarding environmental protection and so on, what might you say would be key things that need to happen, both personally, within our lives, but also, not trying to think about what might be the best international agreements or something that might come out of COP meetings, but what do you think the best route of action is to protect the environment over the next few years?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I think one thing that is obvious to you when you live on the space station is your use of stuff. What arrives to space station, how you eat, what do you do with your trash, what do you do with the materials on the space station. So it gives you a really strong feeling of what a closed environment's like, because you have all of your materials, your oxygen, your water, your food, your trash, your clothing, your equipment. It's all there, and it all has to fit into the purpose of how you're living your life. So the Earth is a closed system as well. It's just closed in a big way that we don't sense it being closed, because you think we've got infinite air and infinite water and infinite soil and infinite resources, and we don't. And so I think if all of us, from a personal viewpoint, can think a little bit more about the fact that we live in a closed system, and there's a finite supply of everything that we use in our everyday life, and think about recycling or turning off your light switches when you're not in the room, or getting the light bulbs that conserve power, and just doing little things like that, it'll make a big difference, because we live in a closed system. We do not have an infinite supply of consumables on this planet. It's a closed system. And so things you can do to conserve just on an everyday basis. If everybody conserves, 0.5% of power or something, then you take that across the 8 billion people on the planet, that's huge. So you may not seem like you're making an effort or an effect, but you are.
Maybe just to rephrase then a little bit. How do you reestablish a connection to where we live? For people that won't get the chance to go to space, how do you reestablish a connection to place?
Well, I'll take a crack at that. I think it's about education. I think we have to increase awareness, and I think Sandy just gave a great little 30-second soundbite of what a message might be, but there are certainly other messages out there. And to tie it back to the theme of the panel a little bit, it is, when you're in space and you see the Earth, it is sort of an educational message that hits you over the head pretty hard. And unfortunately, we probably won't be able to take the billions of people on the planet to see what that looks like from elsewhere. But I think there are means to explain through programs, what the impacts are, and it has to be a slow, steady, constant force to make people smarter about the planet.
Okay.
Let me add the issue of media. One of the things that we're dealing with here, as I pointed out, there's been 50 years of space media, and somehow or another those of us on the planet haven't gotten the same experience that the guys who go into space have. So first off, we need to listen to these folks. We need to compile what all of them have said, the 500 and some folks, what they have said about their experiences and what they think are the most important aspects and how it's likely to affect our culture and planet. And then we need to examine why it is that we're not getting it through conventional media. This is media studies and cognitive science. This is going on right now for various reasons. Teleconferencing, virtual reality, simulation technologies of all kinds. Apply this to communicating the astronauts' experiences. Let's come as close as we can to creating simulations. NASA history showed very clearly that it was the increasingly sophisticated and adult acceptance of space science fiction in the 50s and early 60s that helped drive public acceptance of Kennedy's call to go to the moon. That's been often cited. It's rather peculiar to me that there's almost no space science fiction or science faction, as Disney called it, mixing the two together, that's about this new space age. Why not? We need to look at that. We need to find ways to get artists and media creators to put this into the media sphere, to help saturate it with this meme, and to overcome the loss of the sense of space awareness that has really been continuing since the end of Apollo. So the media side of it is just as important as the direct flight and even just education.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
My name is Jennifer Kennedy. I am a middle school educator from northern Alabama. And I have a comment first and then a question for Dr. Magnus. My comment first is I think our first space tourists need to be artists and poets, because I think they have the capacity to kind of explain to everyone else what you all feel. What's the difference in the overview effect between a short duration flight and a long duration flight? Do you feel it when you're only up for 300 orbits, or do you feel it more when you're up there for 4.5 months?
I think the effect is the same because it's the view out the Earth that makes you feel like this. What's different between a short duration, and I think Mike will probably agree with me and speak up, is when you're on a shuttle mission, a short duration flight, you are working very, very hard in a very, very short time constrained fashion, and you don't have a lot of time to sit at the window and just enjoy it and think about it. You have time to look out the window and go, oh my gosh, our atmosphere is so thin, I gotta go do this other thing. But when you live on space station, it's like having a normal job. It's more like a marathon as opposed to a sprint. And so you can spend an hour and a half or 2 hours at the window and really kind of get a little bit more internally philosophical about it. So it's just the amount of time you have to contemplate it, even though the visceral experiential effect is the same. You can sort of take it in on another level when you live there. I don't know, Mike, if you agree with that.
I agree with everything you said about the sprint and the marathon. I mean, these are sort of cliches that we use a lot, and they're very accurate. My shortest flight was 13 days. My longest was 215. That's a pretty big gap. And I would say that the magnitude of the effect is not really any different. And I think it's because the experience is so otherworldly that when you come back, it's really hard to connect to it. So when you're in that world, it does become, I would never say routine, but you assimilate. Human beings do that over time. So when you float by a window after you've been up there for a long time, you might not be as tempted to look out it as you were the first day. But once when you do take some time and look out the window, on the 215th day, the view is equally spectacular. But when you come back, it's to go through a door, and whether you've been away for a really long time or a short time, all you know is that what's on the other side of that door is really something sort of special. And I don't think I think you maybe understand it a little bit better when you've been up there for longer, but I think the magnitude is about the same when you come back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there, Alex Howerton, lifelong space enthusiast. If I or anyone is interested in learning more about the Overview Effect or getting involved with the Overview Institute, is there a website or something we can go to and find out more?
Yes, Alex, there is a website. This is a planted question. Alex and David and I are the interim operating committee of the Overview Institute. So yes, www.overviewinstitute.org is the website. And there's a lot of material on there. We welcome everyone to go there and take a look. We're working really hard to unpack this phenomenon and try to understand it. I think, you've seen from the comments today, it's not simple. And that's what makes it fun. When I wrote the book, I sort of thought, well, that's it. That's the Overview Effect. Everybody knows what it is now. We'll move on. So now it's 35, 40 years later. We're still talking about it and trying to understand it better. So we want to invite all of you to become part of that effort. Any other questions?
Our social media expert has also recommended that those of you who talk about this in social media use #overview.
Yeah.
Very good, thank you.
Okay.
#Overview Effect, we're being corrected here.
Well, actually, there's both.
There's either one, okay.
My name is Ron Hauser from Houston, Texas. I'm a lifelong science fiction reader and a space enthusiast. I didn't know if you were aware that there was a short story written in the early 60s about something very similar to the Overview Effect. I believe it was called The Far Effect or The Far Sight. And,
The Far Look, I believe. Yes.
Yeah, so you're familiar with that.
Yeah, just, your name was what again? Sorry.
Ron Hauser.
Yeah, Ron is right. There was a book written, or novella, short story, called The Far Look, and it really predicted what we're talking about very, very early in the space age. And it was basically people went to the moon and they came back and they were different. Am I right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Very different. In fact, they all became world leaders in industry, politics, whatnot.
Yeah.
So I guess it's up to y'all.
Yeah.
The question I have is, how can we, in the long term, guarantee governmental support for the space program? Because as you know, the politicians, as they come and go, change their stances and the money available. So how can we guarantee some long?
Anybody?
You know, when we have that secret sauce, we will be distributing it liberally. So I've been here, as I said, for a year and a half, and have had a front row seat to how the sausage is made. And I think that the answer is, in representative democracy, the representatives have to hear from their constituents. And that is, if what they really care about is being reelected, and if it's a big enough issue for their constituents to promote space, then they will promote space.
Well, it's our future as a race.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's a challenge because for all the enthusiasts that are in the room, there are lots of other people who don't want to see their money spent. They don't see the return on investment. You know, what's in it for me? It's very short term. It's a difficult argument to make to those people, even though I and I'm sure everybody here would join in saying that it's the right thing to do, but it's not easy.
Perhaps send all candidates to space first. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
Down here, okay. Hi, I'm Mary Walker. I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I live in DC, go blue. I live in DC now, and I'm an energy efficiency engineer, and I run an international sustainable development nonprofit. And I'm obsessed with climate change, and I've been a lifelong Earth advocate, and I actually didn't really believe in going out to space because I kept thinking, you know, we have so many problems here on Earth, why don't we focus on staying on the planet and, you know, working on these problems? So I thought today's movie presentation was so profoundly moving and beautiful, and it brought me, you know, for like 15 minutes into your world, and it helped me understand, you know, why we're all obsessed with our planet, and you put it into the right words. You know, we're all on the same spaceship, we're all working together, and it's like making me emotional because it was so beautiful. And I think that if we could take this message and show a lot of students and graduate students and university students around the world and translate into many different languages, I think that would help people who can't travel, who can't fly to other countries and states, see what you've seen and feel what I and you feel all the time. Also, I think you were talking about education, and I work with environmental education in global settings with villagers, and they look at me and they say, wow, that's really, really great, but I don't have the resources, I don't have the time to be able to do anything. And so if we can dissect very small, actionable things that we can all do together to connect as a direct tie-in right after this is being shown, then I think people will take that emotion and they will act on it, and maybe they can pass it to someone else. So this wasn't really a question, but a comment, a ranting comment, and I just want to tell you thank you so much for putting this out there, and I will definitely do my job on Facebook and Twitter and spreading the word through the nonprofit and through my community.
Okay, thank you.
It's Mary, right? Yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to say is that the split between the space movement and the environmental movement that happened in the 60s is unfortunate. One of our goals is to bring them back together. The environmental movement got a huge kickstart from the Apollo pictures of the Earth as a whole system, which is really the beginning in some ways of what we're talking about. And one thing we're doing is we have a 1 to 100 project. We're asking everyone who's seen this film to share it with 100 other people. We'd like to reach a critical mass of people who've seen this film because many people have the reaction you've had, and they're very moved by it, and they understand the connection between the overview effect and environmentalism, and it brings it back together. I do want to say this film is available on Vimeo for free. You can use it in your classes, start a dialogue, start a discussion, and that's the way to get something to happen, I think.
Okay,
Good luck.
thank you. Other questions?
Hi, I'm Johnny. I'm from DC. I'm an intern here. So my question was basically, what do you think is the closest parallel to the overview effect that us, hopefully temporarily earthbound folks could experience?
The closest parallel was the question.
I don't know, it's hard to draw a parallel. I guess personally, I mean, I'll just share this, like, talking about Sarah and your inner. I find that if I'm out in the woods and there's like I remember I was in Colorado horseback riding one time, and I was on a ridge and there was a storm coming in and the wind was blowing through the trees, and it was really just a beautiful moment. It kind of had everything sort of coalesced, and you kind of felt everything connected like that. Or if you're maybe going and looking over a big vista like the Grand Canyon, or if you ever walk on the beach and you look at the ocean and try and imagine how immense the ocean is. It's hard for me to describe. I don't know, Mike, if you can do it
I think you're on the
better.
right path, though. I think
Yeah.
it has to do with, a moment where you sort of feel like you're communing with nature. The difference is, in those moments, you're sort of appreciating, something that's beautiful or impactful. And what we see, while very beautiful, also gives you a different sense of wanting to take care of it. And I don't know that you get that if you just go out on a beautiful walk in the fall and see the leaves and all that. I mean, the visuals are very stimulating, but I'm not sure that it gives you the same feeling of stewardship. But I think that seeing the more beautiful sights that you have ever experienced, those are the moments that I would say are closest to that.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to describe.
I think an important thing, the distinction that Frank has made between the overview and the effect is very important here. In other words, if the overview is essentially seeing the Earth as a planet in space, there's almost nothing other than profound simulations that can come close to that. If it's the effects, which have to do with the sensitivity towards the environment, towards international relations, populations, natural resources, energy, these kinds of things, then specific immersion in those issues can come close, like being immersed in the natural environment, traveling to other cultures. So there are parts and pieces of the final overview effect that can be experienced in other ways. But if we're talking about having the visceral knowledge that the Earth is a planet hanging in an infinite universe, probably the closest thing we can come to it will be really sophisticated simulations, and maybe getting more movie makers to use the actual experience rather than the soap opera-ish approach that's sometimes used.
And I guess that would mean if there's some, and I haven't seen the Hubble telescope movie, but it's IMAX 3D. Some of the movies shot IMAX 3D in space. Go see one of those. That might be probably the closest from a visual standpoint of a window view.
Right.
Did you see the IMAX 3D?
Yes. Yeah,
I would.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add from my own experience, the reason I had this idea was because I was on an airplane. I mean, we have a tool that we don't use very well. And I said before, on that trip, I didn't do what I normally do, which is I try not to be near the window so I can get to the bathroom. I talk to people to pass the time. I read. Today I play with, I work with my computer, etc. That particular time I did earth gazing, as David talked about in the film. I think we've routinized air travel and also made it so difficult that when people get on the plane, they just want to go to sleep. But mindfulness of anything is a very helpful way to move in this direction.
That's a really good point, because although I didn't even think about it myself, usually when I go on air travel, I spend half my time with my forehead glued to the window. I mean, you can, by doing so, you almost get this panoramic feeling. You're not as aware of being inside the plane, sort of looking at the window. You're really looking at it.
toss that in?
Well, we need to leave it there. It's been a wonderful time this afternoon, and thinking about this, seeing the Earth in a new and different way. I think that we can gain some approximation when we look at things on the big screen like an IMAX or in 3D. There's no question about that. But at some level, it's a little bit like seeing the Grand Canyon as a movie projection and then actually going there. Yeah. And there's a world of difference, and I think our two astronauts could speak to that probably ad infinitum, but they've certainly opened the door for that discussion today. Thank you all for coming. Let us thank the panelists one more time. Thank you. And all of you who have spent time today here, we very much appreciate that. And for you teachers, and I know there's at least one who spoke, we are so glad that you are engaged in imparting knowledge to the next generation. Thank you so much.